The image on the screen, I think, nicely summarises the range of support that should be available to elite athletes and performers. In addition to these roles, of course, coaching support is vital. We need to ensure that our top competitors have access to the very best level of coaching expertise, even if that means in some cases bringing in coaching support from outside of the UK. We've seen this in a number of sports, not just football. In terms of sports development, working as sports development professionals, our role would be to ensure that these top coaches are in place and offer them the support they need to be effective. Players and athletes also need regular access to appropriate competitions, tournaments and other competitive events. This really is vital in order to maintain their performance and challenge them. Think about in football, where we have our domestic league, but we also have the Champions League. We also have international football, the European Championships, and of course the pinnacle, the actual World Cup. There are of course similar competitive pathways in a range of other sports. All of our players need to have access to appropriate levels of challenge. Of course, it may at this point come as no surprise to you that funding is vital. It's very, very important. We have to make sure they have sufficient funding. We'll cover that in a little more detail later. There are some other key elements to consider. Career and education, as we've touched on. Some elite sports people may have actually sacrificed their education in order to proceed and do well at sport. It's vital that we plan ahead for these athletes in terms of careers after sport. A good example perhaps is that all apprentices at football clubs must study a BTEC qualification. Of course, a lot of sports people do go on and achieve after sport, or post-sport should we say. This may be down to their positive attitude and other attributes that help them to succeed in sport in the first place. It's quite interesting to look at what ex-elite athletes and players are now doing. It might be worth taking 10 minutes or so to do some research on this. I'm pretty sure they can't all be working for Sky Sports. So, as I said, let's take a quick break. Maybe do a Google search. Think of your favourite sort of players, athletes, sports people who are no longer actively playing sport, and do a bit of research and see where they are at the moment. I'd like to take some time now to discuss potential problems. Of course, as in other levels or stages of the sports development pathway or pyramid, there are always issues that can be problematic. When we look at elite sport, this is no different. Finance is crucial. This can be abused by people who have the financial capacity to meet training costs. Some funded athletes may abuse the system and take public funding when they don't really need it, as they gain enough funding from endorsements, for example. On the flip side of this, Andy Murray is a very positive example. He's always been able to fund himself, okay? So that's a really good example there of a high-profile sports person. In terms of funding, the UK government or the NGBs, they don't have endless resources. There are arguments that we as sports development professionals need to be more stringent in ensuring that funding goes to the athletes who deserve and need it the most. This, of course, is a very difficult area to work within, and it's something that a sports development professional working at the elite stage would potentially need to do, and could potentially, of course, prove to be quite challenging. The hyperlink that you'll find on the PowerPoint actually shows the Welsh Sport Institute in Cardiff. And if we're looking here at mass sport versus excellence, well, as we said, national sports centres, for example, I'll talk about the one in Cardiff, they are set up and geared towards providing support for elite level athletes. However, in order to make that facility viable financially, they also need to offer them out to the general public. As you can imagine, this can be a very tricky situation in terms of balancing things properly. But the bottom line is financial, and the bottom line is sustainability. As sports development officers and sports development professionals, we need to consider, are we able to manage both in that situation there? Ideally, of course, in terms of elite sports development, we would want these national centres to be exclusively for the benefit of our elite athletes. As I said, this isn't always the case. I mentioned the Wiz down in Cardiff, the Welsh Institute for Sport. But another good example, if I can use a football example, would be St George's Park. I actually attended my Youth Award Module 3 there It's a wonderful facility, obviously designed with the needs of elite players in mind. Not myself, and certainly not the other people on the course who were there with me, but we were able to use it. So there's often a payoff between what is ideal for elite performers and also financial issues. We can say that the identification of elite performance is often difficult. Taking that talent through to the next stage can be tricky. Let's take another football example. When we look at football scouting, they identify large numbers of young people at developmental levels. Do we have the right systems in place for these young players to make the transition? There is some ongoing criticism of the high level of foreign imports in football, in the UK in particular. Of course, a question that we can ask is, does this have an effect on youth development in the United Kingdom? It's a huge debate. I'm sure you've heard of this one many times in the past. Does it affect national performances? Something we could talk about for quite some time, and we don't really have the time at the moment, okay? But something that's worth considering, very much so. Another issue that we would need to consider from a developmental perspective is, does the support we give to elite performers have a positive impact on other levels of the developmental pyramid? Can we justify this large investment into elite sport? I mentioned Game Plan earlier when we talked about recommended reading, and the evidence presented by Game Plan in 2002 was quite clear. I'll just read you a little quote here. International success does not appear to stimulate sustained increases in participation, and hosting events does not appear to increase long-term success. There's also the suggestion that hosting major international events based around elite sport does not necessarily have a positive impact on participation at other levels of the pyramid. 2002 Olympics, they were designed with legacy in mind in terms of improving this participation at the grassroots or foundation phase, right the way through the stages we've already discussed, all on the back of elite Olympic performances. There was some evidence of a spike in participation, but crucially, there is also a suggestion and some evidence to suggest that this spike has not been maintained. So we do have a dilemma. If we carry on funding sport at the highest level, is there sufficient justification in terms of this funding, in terms of encouraging participation at the lower level? We may find that in future there are some changes in terms of the funding available to elite sport based on that agenda. That's something we need to wait and see.